Before we get to the ending, let's go back to the beginning. I want to talk a bit about Enniscorthy in the early 1950s. And I know it's set a few years before you were born, but what was it like back then?
I mean, I think that the secret history of Ireland, really from the middle of the 19th century, was that everyone in every family lost someone. You know, that people went, and if you went to America, you often never came back. And if you went to Australia or New Zealand, if you went to England, it was different. But that was that whole idea of realizing with the older generation that there was someone missing in almost every family. And so that idea, if you had a job, you were very, very lucky. And my mother's two younger sisters, who really, I suppose this film is more about, both of them had jobs precisely in that place, S&AG Davis, that the note paper is there from. They had jobs there. And of course, the older one was a bossier one. And of course, if you worked in that, it was an old Presbyterian place it was very patrician, so that automatically, if you worked in the office, you were a member of the 9-hole golf club. You know, so you played golf. So that golf thing was very much part of the deal. And
I should add, what I know of Ireland is that golf is not an aristocratic sport. It's
no.
a game that's accessible to everybody.
Yes, exactly. But nonetheless, the golf club would have a sort of social cachet of some sort. If you worked in an office, that office was an important place to work. And so I was sort of using that idea, imagining that one of my aunts, the younger one, the one who was easier to manage or had no strategies for herself, that she was the one who went, you know, and I was using that sort of... but there was an awful lot of... In the summer, people would come back from England, or later on, people would come back from America. There was always that sense of... people who had gone, people returning with English accents or with different attitudes. And the Americans tended to talk big about the dollar. The ones who went to England were more sort of beaten down. But it was very much part of the fabric of the town. I suppose the difference really was that you could go to America and that your descendant could become president, as in the case of Kennedy, who was from County Wexford. But obviously, in the case of England, your descendants could not become queen. I mean, there was it was written in legislation. You know, there was really would not be something you would hope to become. You know.
But why did you want to set your novel in that particular time? Was it because you were thinking of imagining or reimagining what the life of your aunt might have been?
I wanted it after the war and before the 60s. Because once the 60s start, you have to fill the thing with the names of the songs, with the different dances, with the whole different way people are feeling about, you know, women are dressing in a different way. And you have to put all that fashion and pop songs, the Beatles in. Whereas if you get it in this period, it's a period in which there's a sort of almost a sort of cultural neutrality, where there's almost nothing happening in that area, and you can concentrate more and more on the actual individual spirit, on the internal life of this young woman. So that was the reason why. But also, really, she comes at the very end of that wave of emigrants from Ireland to the United States, where by the 60s, America was closed and people were going to England much more because, just there was a whole difference in getting visas. So it would have been, she would have been one of the last to come in that sort of, under that sort of system.
And I hadn't actually realized it till I was putting together my introduction that both you and Nick Hornby had put women at the center of your recent work. In your case, Mary, Ailish, and Nora Webster, the latter inspired by the life of your mother. First, since the other two have women's names in the title, why is it called Brooklyn?
It begins with that I was writing the novel Nora Webster. I began the novel Nora Webster in the year 2000. What happened next was that I was always postponing it and not working on it. And then I went to spend a semester teaching at the University of Texas in Austin. I found Austin difficult. it's a joke that Brendan Behan made about Toronto, but he was deported from Toronto for being drunk. He took enormous exception to Toronto, and he was asked what did he think of Toronto as he was being boarded onto the plane, by the police, and he said, "It'll be lovely when you finish it." And
but you have to say why he was drunk.
well, he was just generally drunk.
No, I know, but it's because he took literally the idea that you had to drink Canada dry.
Yeah, he said on arrival in Canada, he said, "Drink Canada dry," and anyway. But I was in Austin, and I began to feel homesick, and I missed especially in the morning, just waking up, missing Irish things, the Irish news, things I don't even like, Irish newspapers, Irish bread, Irish food, Irish people, and so when I came home. I went to read over that section, which is the first section of Nora Webster, and there it was on about page 3. The little story of the woman who had come to the house, and that is real. That's what happened. This woman came to the house after my father died, and they were all talking, and I remember her vividly. She'd never been in the house before, and I think after she left, because they were really good at that, after someone left, talking about them, and someone told a story that woman's daughter went to Brooklyn. And the woman herself had all sorts of letters to show my mother. They were all from Brooklyn. She didn't say America. She didn't say New York. It was all Brooklyn. Her daughter was in Brooklyn. It was a new word. And so then they talked about her daughter who had come home from Brooklyn without telling them she was married. And that's all I had. So I had that story stored up in my head for, more than 40 years. Really, yeah.
Because your father died when you were 12.
Yeah, so it was more than 40 years. I had that story in my head of just that. I saw that old woman on the street. That's the woman whose daughter went to Brooklyn and who came home that time and took off her wedding ring on the boat. She took off her wedding ring because she didn't want to let them know that she was married in America. My mother used to say, she got married because a fellow in America was so mad about her, he wouldn't let her go home unless she married him. And it was a subject for discussion at home, this thing that had happened, as so many other things were. They were none of our business, really, And that was why it was Brooklyn, because it was always Brooklyn, that story. So that because I had just been away myself and had been feeling odd about being away and loved coming home and then was uneasy when I was home, I could fill in the emotions for her about what it's like to be away, or even though I'd been away before, but this time it hit me harder.
Even in terms of the intense homesickness?
Yeah, just wanting to go home. And so that's really, when I saw the 3 or 4 lines in the novel, that they're still there in the novel, Nora Webster, which is the old woman coming to the house and talking about her daughter. I thought, that's a story. I didn't know, I thought it might be a short story or maybe a long short story. But it just, as I worked on it, I put more and more into it. And then it became the novel. So it happened by accident.
And why women's experience?
If she's a young man, first of all, the woman's daughter, you see, a young man coming home like that would actually not have to worry. He would not, first of all, men didn't wear wedding rings in those years anyway, but also he would not come, if he was going to marry in America, he would be braver about it. He'd let them know he was marrying. But in other words, her fear of them, her uncertainty over what she should and shouldn't do is very much what will happen to a young woman. But also her life in Brooklyn, if a young man goes there, he gets involved, he finds a bar to drink in, he owns the streets, he gets involved in sport. There's a whole outer life he has that would be almost a social life. Whereas I wanted her to have an inner life, and a life that really would depend on the inside, the inside of her bedroom and the inside of her mind. And therefore, it would be an entirely different novel. In other words, a young man, no matter what he'll do, will have a sort of swagger about him in the way he will proceed. And if he were to get married in America, sure, he'd just write home and say, guess what I just did the other day? I got married. And he'd sort of put it up to them. Whereas with her, she just knew it would break her mother's heart.
But you've also said that Ailish is based partly on yourself, and not just the homesickness, but other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I come forth in a family, and anyone here who's ever thought of coming forth in a family, you know very well that the others are always deciding things for you from early on in your life. You know, from the age of, like, the time you're born, people are leading you around, or you go to bed earlier than the others, or, you know, you're never quite sure what you should and shouldn't do until you look over to see what the others are doing. The others will get away with things, and then you'll get away with them, but you'll never find out, you'll never negotiate those freedoms yourself. So I was working out that sort of stuff.
Yeah, in the novel, Ailish has 3 older brothers as well as an older sister. For the film, they've simplified that.
Yeah, but I think there's also the loss of the father, but also all that. I'll tell you one thing, that when I went to live in Spain when I was 20, and I stayed there for 3 years, and it was really irritating when I came home that they had no interest in what had happened to me. You know, they were just glad they were glad I was safe and home, but they had loads of things to tell me about the neighbours, Mrs. So-and-so, guess what? And it was something that she just went down the road and she came back earlier than usual or something. And I would want to tell them, you know, I actually saw a revolution, you know, I actually nearly saw, you know, and that I put all that in when she comes back from Brooklyn, the mother...
You were there when Franco died.
Yeah, I was there when Franco died. I was there when the whole thing happened. But if you try to talk about it, they sort of glaze over and tell you, oh, guess who was asking for you? And so be some stupid old cousin. And, you know, like I put all that stuff about coming home to the town. You know, yeah, there's a whole lot of that stuff in the book, yeah.
Now, in your novel, you acknowledge certain aspects of social change that was taking place in America, such as the greater acceptance of African Americans in the department store, the accountant teacher is a Holocaust survivor, things like that. Now that none of that made it into the movie, which is not surprising because a screenplay has to cut from a novel. Is there anything that you miss in the movie?
I think there's a scene that I would have put into the screenplay where I stole it from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which might be why Nick Hornby decided he just wasn't going to go on, wasn't going to do it this way. And he also, I think, wanted to make Jim into a particular sort of decent character. But it's at the very early moment in that first dance hall where all those rugby fellas come in, and among them is Jim, and he looks at Ailish, but he doesn't look at her twice. In other words, he thinks he might dance with her, but then he thinks better of it. And then, of course, later, when she comes back from America, she's much more glamorous and he really wants her, which is sort of like Mr. Darcy. You know, it was that opening thing was like Mr. Darcy with Elizabeth at the dance in Pride and Prejudice. So that's in the novel. But I also think one of the reasons why Nick didn't do it was he wanted to move as fast as he could from Enniscorthy to Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Because if you didn't do that, you just have these elongated sequences where what's happening to her before she goes. It's very crisply done, that business of her leaving. If you just look at scene, and then she's in Brooklyn, or she's on the boat. And I can see why he did it, that he didn't want a drama happening to her at home with a young man. He wanted to get her on that boat. And so I think there was a reason for that.
Yeah, of course, the novel starts with her getting the job at Miss Kelly's, not leaving the job at Miss Kelly's. Now, you said you were interested in the idea of American charm, that Irish charm was not to be trusted. What did you mean?
I mean that it's really, if there's someone in Ireland who's a pure smiler, you know, like Emery Cohen in this, like is always, hey, you know, you just watch him very, very carefully. And you would watch him, what you'd really need to see, get him drunk, and you'd find that there could be a dreadful little thug inside that fellow, and that he was just masking it with this smiling business. And one of the real problems that she has is how to read American charm, that she just keeps presuming there's going to be some part of Tony that's going to show up at some point that's going to be pure evil. There's going to be, you know, well, if not pure evil, he's going to use bad language, or he's going to have another girlfriend, he's going to betray her, he's going to like have some nastiness in him. And what she keeps finding, every layer of him she pulls away, there's a layer inside that is equally charming. She finds a charm, that American charm is actually real. And that fascinates her because at home it wouldn't be like that. But the problem she has is she doesn't know his cousins. She doesn't know anyone who was in school with him. She's on her own in this foreign country trying to read this young man with no clues at all about him. And that means that she really has to work at him. But yes, the difference between, I notice this sometimes, that with students or with people I know in America, that they really are genuinely sweet and charming, and they don't say the most foulest things after half a bottle of wine. But you go home and you really would watch people carefully, and you get to know, and it's a sort of fascinating difference between the two countries that, we.
So you think there's a dark side to Jim Farrell?
No, and I wanted to paint Jim Farrell in exactly the opposite way. In other words, he's a serious man. He doesn't smile. And that's an extraordinary performance by Donald Gleeson, because so many Irish actors have to play drunken Irish people, IRA Irish people, thuggish Irish people, just generally, and what he decided to play him as was a fully decent fellow who's really sincere, who says what he means and doesn't try to over-charm her, but actually has a sort of bedrock of stability about him, of pure stability. So he's very unusual in that respect. And I think the way Donald plays him is it's an amazing performance, because he doesn't overdo it. But that Jim is a serious fellow, and he means business. And when he says he loves her, but she knows how to read him, because she knows who all his friends are. And she, in the town, she knows who his parents are. So she has no difficulty with his stability. She knows he's a stable fellow who will take the pub from his father and run it very well in the rugby club, but he'll change his hairdo if she laughs at it. But with poor Emery, she can't read him. And but in the process of reading him, she goes very close to him. She moves in because she really has to get to know him.
Apart from your cameo, how involved were you in the filmmaking?
Oh,
Were you consulted on the screenplay?
No. I asked at the very beginning, when Finola Dwyer approached me, I said, "Can you get Nick Hornby to write the screenplay?" She said, "Well, I could ask him." And Finola is his partners in the film company with Nick's wife, and they had just made an education. And I thought Nick would bring something very special to the screenplay. And then they wrote to say that Nick could do it, and then we did contracts and stuff. But I didn't have his email address. I didn't have a phone number for him. I never bothered him, and he never bothered me. And in other words, we're old enough, both of us. Neither of us is a sort of bedwetter. That we actually, we just realized that he didn't. There's nothing worse than the author annoying you over, "Oh, leave this in, I want this in, I want that in." And so when he'd written the second draft, which is very close to the final draft, he sent it to me, and I was in London. I saw him. Just there were one or two words, but not scenes as much as words, that I didn't think were right for Irish usage, that just seemed to be just an English ear on Irish dialogue.
Do you remember what?
Yeah, there was, the particular one, which I think Saoirse would have solved very quickly, was that we would never use mummy. Mummy is in Egypt, and that it would be mam, ma, or mammy, but you would not say mummy. And I remember saying this to Nick. I remember exactly where we were sitting, and I said, "We would never say mummy." And he looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" And I said, yeah, I'm sure. And but I mean, Saoirse would have worked that out for him anyway. It really wasn't a big deal.
Now, but you were keen that the movie be shot in Enniscorthy. Why was that? Which is both your hometown and where the novel is set, in part. So, why was that so important for you?
Well, that if this could be done for me, it would be a pure act of recuperation, of getting the place back, of getting that time when my aunts were still alive, when just filming the town, and no one had ever thought of filming in Enniscorthy, and those streets that they film are not the main streets. People say, "Why did they do those streets?" But actually, they're the streets very close to where I was brought up, and just the way they walk, and where the dance is. My father ran dances in that dance hall to raise money for a local museum. in the 1950s. So those spaces really mean something to me emotionally.
And the cathedral, I think, is the one it used to.
Yeah, and the cathedral is the cathedral we were all, not only will I, but I mean, death. What's it called? Birth and death and all that business. Baptism, funerals, and all the stuff.
Mass.
But in fact, they only were allowed to use the outside of the cathedral. The inside part was somewhere else, but the outside is precisely, and the extras, people coming out were people from the town. But the problem then was that there was no, the cinema in the town is closed. There's been a bit of an economic downturn in the town. And so they wanted to show the film in another town and bus the people from Enniscorthy to another town called Wexford, which is a nice town, but I had to say, they were English people, I had to say to them, we don't like Wexford and we won't go there. And they said, well, it's only 10 miles away. And I said, I know, that's why we don't like them. And we know them. And so they said it would have to be shown in a proper way, So the local hotel, God bless them, actually built a cinema in their ballroom, raked seats, the whole business, and got professional people to put in screens. And they had 2 screenings. And there was an amazing moment when the film opened and people in the town realized that they were seeing John Street going towards Court Street. And then, the Athenaeum, which is the name of the ballroom, and that all of that was being used. And that there were 2 screenings and everyone dressed up as though it was Oscar night. And actually people looked much better, and some of the clothes were, in my view, more expensive, and also people just looked better than the people did at the Academy Awards. And the bar of the hotel didn't. I left it. I don't know what time I left the hotel at, but the bar was still open, and there were a lot of people still there. So everyone made a night of it. It was a big night in the town. But
because everybody had wanted to be an extra. I mean,
the whole town had wanted to be an extra, and they were also slightly puzzled at the idea that the shooting started about 5:30 in the morning. Normally, if there's someone wandering around Enniscorthy at 5:30 in the morning, it's someone coming home from somewhere. And people don't really go to work until about 9 or 10. But they couldn't believe that Saoirse and Donal and all the others were. There they were, and all the crews up at 5:30 to start their day's work. So it was a bit of a lesson to the town. I don't think they've learned the lesson, but it was a lesson nonetheless.
In some ways, the movie feels sweeter and more pastel-colored than your novel, perhaps reflecting Nick Hornby's sensibility, although, I mean, it's not that you aren't funny. In fact, I would say that in person you're funnier than he is. But what do you think? There seems to be a certain seriousness or sadness that comes through.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think those sequences when she's homesick are actually quite severe. That you really are with her. Also, the stuff on the boat is awful in the film. You really feel sorry for her, and she's because you can see her, and she's so innocent and she's so elegant in a certain way.
I don't know, like the boarding house, Mrs. Kehoe, the other girls at the boarding house. It's not as oppressive.
Yeah, I think the boarding house sequences, Nick went for a broader comedy than I did, and I can see why he did that, because he just wanted to have something in between, where every time you cut to the girls, to those horrible, mean co-boarders of hers, something very funny, broader comedy, I think, than I put into the book. But if I were doing the book again, I don't know. I mean, I felt that in a film you almost needed that, rather than keeping it heavy, to try and lighten it for a few minutes. Maybe it's a lesson I should learn from Nick,
No, but I think you've even said when people talk about that your wit and that every time you write you start off funny and then it turns sad on you. So, What about the ending? I mean, in the novel, it's Ailish's mother who says to her, "You must be with your husband." It's not Ailish who says, "I want to be with my husband." There are even moments when she reflects that she doesn't love Tony, though it ends with her leaving Ireland. But that's all we know. What do you think of the ending?
I think that in a novel and in film, you make a different contract. And in a novel, because the reader cannot see every moment, I mean, you cannot see what people actually look like. You cannot see the colors, and you can't see the decor. You start imagining everything. And part of the deal is, as you're reading a novel, you're actually imagining much more than you're being told. You're being you're being given a set of clues to allow you to imagine everything. And this means that when you're coming to the end of a novel, you can actually leave quite a lot unstated, undramatized, undealt with, for the reader to put the book down and to say, I think I can now see what might happen here. People might have different versions of it, but nonetheless you can do that, so that the novel ends with that scene, on that moment on the train. Now, in a film you can't do that, because you've been spelling out every color, every person, what they look like, each way. You know, when you want a song, you get a singer to sing the song. You get the emotion from that. And so Nick added that voiceover coming from the boat onto the end. And I found that that's the scene that I'm a complete sucker for emotionally. I just love when she's there and the brother sees her first and he realizes the significance of this. It's a wonderful moment for him, because he can see, oh my God, we're going to have Tony's going to stop going on about this. She's back. She's back. And then Tony sees her. And Tony's face is so great. And then he just hands the toolbox to his brother. And the big moment that you really worry is, oh my God, is he going to be knocked over by a car, you know? And then she has that beautiful thing to say about, you know, come a time when you'll find someone of your own, someone who you want. And it's quite beautifully written, that. It's very carefully chiseled. I mean, that's the great thing Nick did, that last thing. And then you see them together and you think, and you just go, and you just go, you know, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But I didn't write it, Nick wrote it.
When you wrote your ending, it's much more ambiguous. How did you imagine? Did you? Or you thought, I'm going to take her to this point, and she's going to go back to Tony, she's going to go back to Jim, she's going to go to neither? I mean,
no, I think it's always clear in the novel that she's leaving. What's not clear in the novel is what will happen when she arrives after all the time she's left him, how she will manage to approach him and what she will say to him. You know, that first encounter between them, of her having this. I tell you one thing that I would have left in the film, where they're on that beach that day in Ireland in the novel, and a man comes and takes a photograph of them. And she has that photograph. And as she's leaving Ireland, she puts it at the bottom of her suitcase. And that photograph will be the photograph that at some time in the future, one of her American children would say, who were they that day in that photograph? And she won't be able to say. She'll just say, they were just people I knew. A story she'll never tell. A story she'll keep silent about when she goes back to America. She will not tell Tony what has happened in Ireland. She will keep that to herself. It will never be known. And she'll bring that with her all her life. So I'm sort of interested in that idea that on the train in the end of my book, she says that that the Jim Farrell, something that he will get over, quickly enough, but she will always carry with her the life she could have lived and didn't live. He will always be living he'll be always living his life.
His life, and her impact on it will diminish, but for her...
Yes, that her impact will diminish in time, but his impact on her won't, because it's the shadow life. So all of that thing was in my head, but I thought I'd leave all that for the reader to work out in the aftermath of the process of reading. I didn't want to spell all that out.
And Saoirse Ronan seems perfect as Ailish. Is she and again, Books on Film regulars may remember her from Atonement from 2008 when we had Christopher Hampton to talk about it, and also when she got her other Oscar nomination. Did she fit your mental image of Ailish?
I mean, what happened was that there came a moment when there was a great deal at stake for all of us in this, because I was coming and going out of Ireland all the time. Finola Dwyer, who is the person I mentioned, who produced the film, her mother had emigrated to New Zealand in precisely the same year, in 1951, from Ireland. And Finola had come back, to live in London. Saoirse was born in New York. Her parents had emigrated from Ireland, but eventually they decided to bring her back to Ireland. But she, at the time the film was being made, and she's spoken about this, it was the first time that, because she'd been a child actress, she was so protected. But now she was living on her own for the first time in London, living as a young woman alone. And John Crowley, who directed the film, is from Cork in Ireland, and he lives in London. and he lives a sort of London life, but he really, his home is, or wherever his home is, but he's from Cork. And so that all of us had something at stake in this. So that when we went on the road, when we were doing publicity later, we would end up at night sitting in places, telling our stories to each other. And that was sort of fascinating because it was all about what the film had evoked, what the film had brought up in people. And what John said about Saoirse, John Crowley, the director, was that he realized very early on that she would have made a great silent era actress. That if he could just trust her face, he could get the film. And there's a moment early on when she's in the dance hall, when she's amused at Nancy going off to dance, and then she smiles at that in a sort of an amused way. And then she looks around, and in that gaze, when she looks around, it's that she realizes, I'm leaving here. This is not my place anymore. And she gets sad for a second, and then something else happens to her face. She gets determined. She's going to go now. There's no reason why she should stay in this place. So in a few seconds, a few things happen. I mean, the weather of her face really does change. And throughout the film, when John wanted something, he just put the camera on her face and let her face do the talking. And so there was a great relationship between the two of them because he really trusted what she could do. And I think he did it in a very unobtrusive way. It wasn't a director showing what a director could do. It was a director letting an actress show what he could do, or what she could do.
Now, you haven't exactly opted for Brooklyn, but you are spending more time in the United States. Are you a citizen now, or landed, or you did
They
something?
gave me a green card in the United
right.
States after a lot. I had to get 20 people to say I was a decent human being.
And you still have a place in Dublin, a place in Wexford, place in Spain? Place in New York, sort of?
No, but I'm always subletting in New York. I'm always a gypsy in New York. I'm always sleeping in other people's beds with them not there.
And do you identify still more strongly with, obviously these evening sit-arounds, you were talking about Ireland, but how American?
It's a funny process about going back in, and I think anyone Irish knows it, where if you go, especially to JFK, and you go to where the Irish are all going home, and you see everyone, and you just know they're Irish by looking at them. There's something in people's faces, and you look, and the minute you're on the plane, the Aer Lingus air hostesses, and the whole way everyone talks to one another, and you're actually going home. And everybody knows that on the plane, even though there's some tourists on the plane, but it's mainly a lot of Irish people just going home for going home to see people. And I'm absolutely at home there the minute I arrive, and it does irritate me profoundly, but that's just because of me. It's not because of it. And but I find now that I was telling you this earlier, that I was somewhere in the west of Ireland recently. I just loved being there, and I loved the way everyone spoke. I just couldn't have enough of it, and I wanted to stay a few more days and just listen to people, look at people, and it was like being an emigrant. It was like what so many Irish people have felt. Give me another week here, on my 2 weeks home every year. But it's it's very much where I'm from, and the house I have in Wexford is very close to where to the town and to the people I meet, and there's a whole system of manners, a whole way of talking, a whole way of looking at you, that is so careful and tactful, and so much richness in it. But I come and go too much, I don't know what to do.
We'll open to questions. Please wait till the microphone comes to you. And where are we? There's one over there.
Me first? No? In the, I didn't read your book, I'm sorry to apologize, but in the movie, I thought that leaving the mother might be a hard conflict, The mother was alone, the sister had died, but it happens, she says to her, I'm going to say goodbye now because I don't want to see you in the morning. Is that the same way it was handled in the book?
Yeah, the mother says that to her, and it's really shocking because as she's packing and going up and down the stairs to get ready, she realizes her mother is awake in the bedroom listening, but she won't come out again. That it's a hard thing to do. I mean, the mother just doesn't want to say goodbye to her at the door, but there's a long scene where she realizes that she's listening and she's aware of her. And even in the morning, when the mother doesn't come out of the room, she's aware of her. So it's quite a dramatic thing where I just didn't want it to be, a whole lot of farewells. And it came into my head, make this harder for everybody. Give the reader the idea of them. And even though you don't go into the mother's room or the mother's head in the novel, just you're automatically imagining there's this poor woman in this bedroom, lying alone in bed, listening to her daughter packing to go and hearing her going down the stairs and desperate not to go out to say goodbye to her again, and desperate to go out and say goodbye to her again, and just holding herself like that. So that was the idea, that it would be something much harder. And I think, so when she goes to bed like that in the film, it's quite a hard moment, because she's not going to help her pack or stay with her or see her off in the morning. She's just going to say goodbye to her now only once. It's a cold moment.
Although you have this line in the novel where you say that Ailish's family, excuse me, could do anything except say out loud what they're thinking.
Well, I think that's something
You
that...
think that's still true?
I think it's something a
Enniscorthy?
lot of northern countries know about, that we're not... it's not a Brazilian soap opera where we're, all ready to express ourselves and, cry when we're sad. Or people are pretty skilled at certain northern countries I could name, especially, parents of that generation, of just simply saying, I'm going to bed now, you can go off on your own in the morning. I'm not going to see you again. And that being a hard memory to bring with you,
There's somebody there. Yeah.
Welcome. I have a question. When I saw the movie first, and then I read the book. And in the movie, when Rose is found dead on the floor, my first thought was that she had committed suicide. And in the book, I know that it's explained, if my memory is correct, that she has like a heart ailment. And it sort of does describe in the movie sort of later that she had an illness. Was that the impression that you got when you very first saw the film or read the screenplay, that she had killed herself?
No, it didn't. I mean, it really... I can see how... But that it was never in my mind. So when I saw it, it just fulfilled something that was in the narrative. But that I suppose the idea behind it is that she once more was keeping her secret, and her secret was that this was something. I don't know if anyone's ever come across it, but there is a diagnosis where someone can say to you, you could go at any moment, but you could live for 10 years, but and that she had one of those ailments, and she just never told any of them. And she was living with that all the time. And that explains, of course, why she wants to send her younger sister away. Because if she doesn't, what happened in those years was that if there was a widowed mother, one girl stayed with the mother until the mother died. And the mother, of course, the mothers often lived to be 100. So, you'd have this daughter and the mother almost being the opposite way around, like the daughter would become the mother. And so it meant that she was actually getting Ailish out of the equation so that Ailish wouldn't have to be the one who would be the young woman with her mother who could never leave the house. So, that would be the sort of subtext there. Ailish can guess that eventually, but yes, Ailish guesses that eventually, but everyone would know, so that business of leaving your mother to go back to America would be considered a very strange thing to do when you should stay. But yes,
Miss Kelly says it to her right at the
oh,
beginning.
Miss Kelly says to her
Miss
at the
Kelly
beginning.
said, "Your poor sister."
Miss Kelly, who's, by the way, played by a friend of mine, Breach Brennan, who's the nicest woman I've ever known. It's only people who are the sweetest individuals in their personal lives. I mean, her husband, her sons, her friends, her family adore her. You're delighted to see her, and she's always a good word for everybody. I've never heard her speak ill of even the living, you know, but she played that part.
But she says right away, "Your poor sister."
Oh, she
So
sees, she
she's the one
sees the scenario immediately.
and she tells Ailish why. She says, "My sister," and she explains why. Now, what your sister is fated to do. Up there.
Thank you for coming. I read the book, and I felt that in the book, Mrs. Kelly played a huge role in the decision for Saoirse to leave, because I was thinking she's going to stay here. She's got it made in Ireland, and then her secret is blown. And she can't bear to stay around and have to explain herself. Was that the pivot?
Yeah, it would also be that she's really frightened, that she's letting everything drift. Yeah. She's not replying to his letters. She's pretending it's not. I'm interested in the idea that, and I think anyone who's ever been on holidays knows it, that you could be somewhere in the Bahamas yesterday and back in Toronto today, and something that seemed so glittering and real and sharp seemed almost to have crumbled in your mind once you go into your own space, into your own room, into your own house. And anyone who's ever had a love affair on holidays, and you promise, or even made friends on holidays, and you promise, well, we'll meet again next year, or we'll keep in touch. And you realize, when you get home after a week or so, God, I hope I don't have to keep up with that one now. And so I'm interested in that idea of how, you know, that distance between New York and Ireland, she actually forgets that she was in love, which is the strangest and most frightening idea for her, that someone she was desperate to see and be with and happy with, she doesn't even open his letters now. And that was, I suppose, the idea behind it. Yeah.
And in the novel, she doesn't even open the letters. She saves them. She says she'll read them on the ship.
And then she suddenly is so frightened that she's going to be exposed in the town, that everyone will know she's married. And even though she wasn't married in a church, like there's no divorce. I mean, we didn't have legal divorce in Ireland. I mean, any divorce in Ireland until quite recently, because it was in the Constitution, you couldn't get divorced. So, the only person who was ever divorced, and she wasn't even Irish, was Elizabeth Taylor. You know, I mean, she was divorced. And, but the word divorce was not, divorce was not a thing you could do. So she's going to be exposed in the whole town with everybody knowing that she'd done this. And realizing that Jim and his family, everyone would feel differently about her, that she was really quite deceptive. And the only thing she can do in that moment is to decide, I have to go home, I have to go home, I have to go back, that's home, because I have actually blown, I really have burned my boats. I have to go. So Miss Kelly becomes the catalyst for something is going to happen at some moment to make clear to her she has to go back. So I think she always has to go back. What she's doing is having a summer where she postpones and postpones and postpones, and slowly emotions take over. And in that dance sequence, you realize that she would do anything to stay. And even in the wedding moment, where she watches them getting married, and Jim just seems so decent, the way he's being so nice, that actually she'd do anything to stay, but she has to go.
And also, just a small thing, in the novel, when she's telling somebody about Tony and saying only positive things about him, and she's asked, is there anything you don't like about Tony? She says, well, I'd like him to be 2 inches taller. And in the movie, I don't know, in the novel, if Jim is taller.
Jim is taller, and Emery is smaller. Yeah.
or where is the? Oh, it's up there. Yeah.
Hi. This question is for both of you. What are you reading right now?
I'm reading Arundhati Roy's new novel because I'm interviewing her later this week. What are you reading now?
Well, I was talking to you about this book. It's a huge book. It's a biography of the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. That's Milosz. Is that right? And it's an amazing biography because it tells the story of what it was like to be a poet in Warsaw between 1940 and 1945, with the ghetto over here and the Nazis over there, and these poets writing their poems in the middle, and what it was like in the aftermath when everyone realized what they'd been through, what had happened in front of their noses. So it's an extraordinary book, and it's also the story of his exile in the United States, in Berkeley. But I think it's a great story about a single individual who was innocent in so many ways and wanted to be a lyric poet, being caught up in some of the worst, because he was also, of course, he defected. He was a diplomat for the Polish government after the Second World War, and he defected, but defected having left his wife and children in America, and he couldn't get back into America because he'd been a diplomat for too long and he was associated with communism. So it's a great story. It's a translation from a Polish biographer, but it's I promise you. I know it mightn't sound like, but I promise you that it'll keep you awake, it'll keep you up all night to know, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Is he going to be all right? It's going to 1944, 45. You realize, all the rest of the biography is there. He must have lived. But you know what? How did he do that? How did he do that?
Here.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just wondering about Alicia's motives then in the book for returning home. She did it out of fear, and it's sort of, was that the right motive to go home, the right reason to go back to Brooklyn?
That's a really
Out
good
of
question.
fear,
No, it's
I
a really
mean-
good question. She went back out of fear.
Yeah.
And so she simply doesn't know what she's going back into. That's why she's on the train, stops the train, because she doesn't know what she's going to feel when she sees Tony. She doesn't know, but the reader probably does know that the minute she sees him, and things will, but she fears that she's lost him in her own emotions, but she has to go back to him. So it's a hard moment, because she's not going back out of love; she's going back out of fear.
Yeah.
But the possibility,
her to go back
but
out of love.
but the possibility still exists that when she sees him, when she's back in that world, that she will feel again what she felt for him before. That just seeing him and being back in Brooklyn will give her the whole experience again.
You see, I think the movie does that much more than the book, because 10 pages before the end of the book, that she does say she was sure that she did not love Tony now. There's that sense there. So I read the book more bleakly, I think, than.
Yeah, I think you can read the book more bleakly. Yeah.
Are there more questions? Up at the top, yeah.
Hi. Great movie and a great book. I just have a question about the song, and I don't speak Irish. So the "Turning the Rope" song that he sang at the Christmas dinner. Can you just talk about the traditional music and?
Yeah,
That song in particular also.
yeah.
maybe.
I suppose the idea was that I was living in fear that some investor in the film in some country would say someone has to sing Danny Boy at some point. And I would lose all my street credibility. Not that I have much of it, but I like the little bit I have. And that it doesn't really matter in the sense, it's just that the words of the song are about the twisting of the rope, that the mother is trying to get the sort of boyfriend of her daughter out of the house by getting him to twist a rope, and he has to go further and further away. But it is also that just the melody is really beautiful, and I wanted it to remain mysterious. That this was just because it's in Irish, you don't need to know everything about it. But all of them would just sort of loved the fact this singer was back again and is singing in this very old way that would have meant something to a lot of them. Because you see, a lot of the emigrants came from the west of Ireland, which is the poorest part of Ireland, which is where also the traditional music survived best. So you're getting something, therefore, that a lot of them would have recognized. And but I just wanted Irla to sing that song, and I didn't really. I mean, I knew that people wouldn't understand the words, but the alternative would be that he would sing "The Mountains of Mourn" or something, and I would be under that seat, and you know.
I was just thinking that when you were first approached about having your novel made into a film, you said you'd like Nick Hornby to write the screenplay. Did you ever consider writing the screenplay yourself?
I realized from a number of friends of mine who had written screenplays of their own novels that the films had never been made. And you see, this is a huge risk you take. That you're playing. I mean, it really is a question of trying to read a situation where I wanted the person who was most likely to make the film to make. I wanted to work with him, because otherwise, the contract you sign is forever, really. And you can never get the rights back. And people who have a lot of money can buy rights for a lot of books and just fish around to make one film out of buying 5, and it doesn't really bother them. Some people like losing money, and or this is a sort of an investment, and so that the problem my friends had was that you would write the screenplay and spend an extra year rewriting your own book, and you'd have to go to a meeting in the BBC or somewhere with all these fellows in suits looking at you, saying, I don't like that bit, put that bit in there, that bit change there. I would just say, well, this is no way to live, where I'd imagined this so much, I'd imagined it all so carefully. So nobody asked me is the first thing. Nobody asked me. And the second thing is that I would have been wary, because I would have thought, if I do this, someone's going to say, what? He wrote his own screenplay. He's never written one before. Well, I'm not investing in this, But if someone said, hold on a minute, he got Nick Hornby, who's so not Irish. I mean, we tried at one point to call him Nick O'Hornby, because we were out so late some nights and everybody was Irish except Nick. But didn't really stick. And but that somebody who was from outside my culture, who would tell the story so that it would actually maybe make a difference to the story by bringing his sensibility to it, without his need to rewrite the story. In other words, if he needed to tell a story, he could write one of his own novels. So he wouldn't need to write. It wouldn't be his only method of expressing himself. But no, nobody asked me. And
well, before everybody feels too sorry for you, you have written a screen. You have written another screenplay.
Yeah, I wrote a screenplay for the German director Volker Schlondorf, who's people would know best as the director of the Tin Drum, and that was that opened at the Berlin Film Festival earlier this year.
The Handmaid's Tale.
He made The Handmaid's Tale. He made the original Handmaid's Tale. And and I worked actually with Volker. It wasn't just me. It was both of us opposite each other, sort of arguing over every scene. And I mean, it was very interesting to work with him, because he was such an experienced screenwriter. And I learned something from him, interesting, where I thought, because he knows so much about screenwriting, he's going to come into this project knowing what we should do. But he didn't. And it was fascinating, because he would keep saying, I don't know what to do here. Do you any ideas here? And I would say something. He'd say, okay, let's try this and let's try that. And he would keep just listening and trying to build the thing without telling me all the time, I am the guy who won the Oscar. You are from a small town in Ireland. He never did that to me. But he never did that, because he was always trying to work out what to do next from scratch, rather than from some sort of previous. I think that's how he works as a director as well, where he would let the actor build the role, and the actor was Stellan Skarsgård, and I have to say there was one moment that was, I mean, there were a lot of moments where I just thought, this is the strangest experience to be with these. I mean, actually, the Academy Awards part was funny, because as the novelist, you go in a separate entrance, and it's not just there's no red carpet, there's no carpet. and you get put at the back, and people sort of push you out of their way. And there was one moment where I could have, if I'd leaned over a fence, I could have touched Charlotte Rampling. But I didn't think she'd take kindly to that, so I didn't lean over the fence. But I mean, certainly working with Volker, you know, who had done worked with Louis Malle, he had worked with Gunter Grass, and working with Stellan, who had he had actually worked with Ingmar Bergman. You know, there were moments where I felt, oh my God, if the Christian Brothers, when I was aged about 10, had told me, you're going to be working with these people, they would have said, and I would have said, you will not. You'll be very lucky to get a job at all. You know, and there were moments where I did have to make sure I was really here. You know, it did seem a bit new and strange and wonderful. You know.
I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to please thank Colm.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Colm Tóibín will be signing books outside.